Hey guys, welcome to another special episode of Jack's Business Talk. Today we got some friends from Vegas and the ORAC community. Actually, they're all both. And I'm just gonna go left and down. To my left is Frank, old guy REI. Below him is Lindsay. I'm not gonna try to pronounce your last name.
Barrientos.
Oh, I would have been close too. And then below me is Cody Evers.
Hi, everybody.
So,
Well,
so I figured today we would talk a little bit about what we've done since Vegas and just about like three or five and pros and cons in our area that we invest in. So if you guys would like, I can go first, or if one of you guys can go first.
I'll go first. I wasn't in Vegas. Didn't get to make it this year, but we're looking forward to meeting you all there next year. So I don't have much to say about Vegas. So whoever's next can go.
Um, I'll go next. So I did go to Vegas this time. I missed you, Frank, but I'm fairly new to ORAD, one or two at a time since last year. But it was really cool to meet everybody in Vegas, and I think one of the takeaways was a lot of action, like take action upon what you're wanting to do. And for me, it was specifically like social media. I recently opened a YouTube channel, Linda's Investing, and one of the speakers, I'm not gonna remember exactly the name, but was saying basically content that you're putting out there might open the door for new opportunities. And then that's why um, feel like I've been working on putting more videos out and then just educating more of the people that are like basically starting into real estate. And I'm mostly concentrating on educational videos. And that's one of the things that I've been doing since. As far as the real estate goes, I've been working on the current properties that I've been working on, so I haven't added any to my portfolio, but I'm still working on that.
I can hop in here next. Yeah, so I went to Vegas for the second time. I think, am I the only one that went twice? I think so. So yeah, both times great experience. Glad I went. Enough, it was good enough for me to come back for round two. I thought this year, um, you know, was more fun just based on I knew a lot more people, and so like it was like always a moment where you can sit and chat with someone and see how things are going. Compared to the first year, still feeling out everything and trying to introduce yourself. But now, since we knew a lot of people, it was kind of fun to just be able to chat with everybody, and then kind of the extra stuff, meet with people after dinner and all that kind of stuff was really fun. So I'm glad I went, and look forward to doing that in the future. Um, as for the real estate side, we are actually kind of going in through a transition. We're planning on selling a couple properties in a market that um, is a little bit different than my main market, in that we want to kind of upgrade those units too. And the market that it's in, the population is a little bit lower, a little bit harder to find tenants and things like that. So that's kind of part of the reason we're getting out of those units as well.
So you're doing kind of like what Brian Adams is doing, where you're just trying to sell the units and upgrade them.
Yeah, exactly. So we're trying to go, eventually from like, lower end units to try to, the ones I'm like buying are duplexes that are built in 1990, 2000s. And then they're bigger, three bed, two bath, two car garage, that kind of stuff, is what I'm looking for, in Northeast Wisconsin.
Okay. And me, since Vegas, one of my favorite things was meeting all you guys. Cody, I can't remember if I told you this or not, but when I landed and got to the hotel and dropped my stuff off, and Mark was telling me where you guys were, and I was walking over there. As I was as I was walking up the stairs, I was like, "Oh, whenever I sit down, I need to text Cody see if he's coming. I know said he was going to come." I got up there and looked at the table and saw you sitting there. I was like, "Ah, I don't need to text him that now."
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to go. It was fun. Glad to meet you guys in person. Sometimes it's a different feeling from going from virtual meetings versus in person. It's a much different experience and more fun.
You get to meet the tomfoolery in person.
Exactly.
But yeah, since Vegas, I just been kind of working on my own stuff, just trying to finish up renovation. Took pictures today. I'm going to work on the ad later tonight. I was kind of surprised by how long it took. And I still have some problems with it, surprisingly. But yeah, that's all I've been up to. So each one of us kind of invested in different markets, and I figured it would be a good chance to try and see if there's any trends like going across the nation. And that's kind of why, you know, I'm kind of more in the East. Cody's in the Midwest. Frank is mid, but he's almost in the East. And well, I guess I picked a lot of middies. I didn't pick anyone from the West. Oh well.
It's hard to invest out here in the West. Yeah,
Midwest is the way to go.
yeah,
Well, plus also, and I had this thought too. The regular ORAT channel, that's all you really hear about is the West.
yeah. We're well, you guys know the story. We're kind of all over the place. We're in 4 different states, different types of assets. I think they're all they all have their different challenges, but I think what we've been learning, a few of the people that we meet with regularly know we've had a few vacancies in St. Louis in particular, and we bought a couple last summer that are just coming up for rent now, and the rents have dropped a couple $100s from when we bought them and what we analyzed them at when we purchased them. And it hasn't happened in all the markets. In Cody's market, we have a duplex in Milwaukee that's pretty strong. We have a triplex in another part of Missouri that's doing quite well, but and the rents didn't really drop in those areas. But I was talking to Zuber the other day, and he was saying that even in his market in Fresno, things are a little bit lower rent wise this year, for him as well. So it's just tough. If you looked at the fair market rents for 2025 this year in a lot of markets, they separated them by zip code, where typically they might have the whole county under um, one rental listing. Now it's by zip code, and one of the zip codes in Missouri for us dropped. The other one went up a little bit. So it's been hard to gauge. Our unit sat vacant for a while because I tried to price it at last year's rents and it didn't go anywhere at all. So there's it's tough learning one market. It's really tough learning four.
Yeah, I agree with Frank. I mean, I don't really have a lot of years in real estate to see exact trends, but for the last 2 years, there's been that change of moving from zip codes instead of counties to zip codes and fair market rent. So it's brought some changes to different zip codes that in my market in Gary, Indiana, and some zip codes have increased significantly, and some zip codes have remained stagnant. So that's something that we're like, I'm always trying to figure it out, like what is um trying to influence that change, like what is the zip code have over the zip code? Because seemingly the areas look the same.
yeah, I think I get the same feeling, kind of across the table, here as well. We placed a couple units within the last 6 months or so, and one of them was, down $200 from market rent. So we did have that issue, and then the last one, kind of in springtime, we ended up getting what the market rent I thought. So there was definitely some compression in our rental rates, especially through the winter months, but I guess that kind of always happens in Wisconsin too. So I'm not sure if that was more of a bigger picture economy thing or just winters sucking in Wisconsin. So probably a mixture of both. But yeah, and then even now we still have a couple tenants that are struggling to keep up a little bit. So maybe we kind of hearing that a lot lately too. Is there's some tenants that are just getting behind a little bit, and I think that might be more of a widespread economy thing.
I kind of noticed the same thing with our tenants, although we're still county by county. They have start breaking up by zip code or anything. But there used to be some tenants that would pay me like a week or even a week and a half early, and they're sometimes now only coming in like 2 or 3 days before the rent's due. So yeah, I think it's just a nationwide thing that is going on.
There is there is a lot of uncertainty with all the stuff that's going on with tariffs and things like that. But I think for us, planning for the rest of this year, just trying to get the properties that we have stabilized and kind of just hang on, and to see what happens towards the end of the year, and see if we'll be able to pick up some more properties maybe next year. But I think I even see it. I mentioned in this market here on the Central Coast in California, it always seemed like people just had loads of money, right? And they didn't. I'm a contractor. They didn't stop remodeling, and they were just putting money into their homes. And now that's kind of tapering off just a touch, and people just are not unsure. They are unsure of what's going to be coming, so they're trying to, I guess, keep as much reserves as possible just in case things keep going down like they have been. The other thing that Lindsay brought up that I was thinking is we're all in markets where the winters were really brutal. And we learned some tough lessons because we had projects going, and when it's snowing and freezing back there, the contractors can't do much, and it extended the projects way longer than they should have. So moving forward, I think if we are able to buy more properties, we'll be making sure we purchase them like in the spring or early summer. That way the projects will be done before the cold sets in and get them rented. We had one property go up for rent in December and it didn't get any action at all. And now that spring is coming, the two that we have up for rent got a lot more responses, and we're actually have tenants that are or applicants that are being screened right now for a couple. So it's looking a lot better. And I'm thankful if they sign leases now, then it'll be, this time of year next year when the leases come due. So we'll have better luck if they end up moving or something like that. So there's a lot to consider in the Midwest.
Yeah, weather is a killer. So I told Frank, for now on, anything that I buy has to be after December.
Yeah. And then by the time you close, it's ready. The weather's going to start to get better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why with the current remodel project I was working on, I wasn't in a huge hurry after the eviction and right before Christmas to try and get it turned around super quick. That's why I took care of some stuff that needed to be taken care of that, I could have kicked down the road further, but it's just like I might as well take this time. Like best case scenario, it's gonna be I probably find a tenant by April. I was like, I'm better off just to get it ready by May.
Yeah, our markets, if we can hold through the winter, then that would be fine. But if you're trying to, let's say you have a private money lender interest payment, then and then you're just delaying the rehab, then that can really be a cash flow killer.
Yeah, and it was just there's too many things between the cold, especially this year MPA was like especially cold, and the fact that you when you're moving you have to park along the street, but there's a giant wall, so it's like you have to carry stuff up basically a flight of stairs or on a ramp up a just to get to the place and then go up three or four more stairs to get stuff in. I was like, no one's gonna want to deal with this in the middle of winter, so I'm better off kicking it to spring and just do some of the maintenance work that, I was gonna do in like 2 or 3 years. Just get it done now and don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think for me, like I guess I don't have winter change my um, contractor schedule. I just try to, still get it done as quick as I can. But with that being said, I know like we might have to offer some concessions in winter just to make sure like we can get, people to see it. With December, January, just super slow, but we still try to fill it if we can. It might take a month and a half or a month, but at least get someone in there by February, and the next cycle around, then you're looking at springtime. So uh, that's typically how it's gone in the past for us. Like we try to get things done, and then get someone in there, whether we have to drop rent $100 or have some concessions with half month off rent or something like that too.
We tried all of that with one of the units. Cody's aware, but on one of those we dropped a half month off to try to get some traction on that one. The second one we didn't do any concessions, and that one got applicants right away. So it's really hard to tell what people are thinking. It seems like a lot of the renters out there are pretty savvy. They want really nice, new looking rentals. I learned that the hard way. We had to freshen paint and floors and things like that just to get, I guess we were getting negative feedback before we did that. And after, people applied right away. So that made a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
They won't just rent anything like some people out there say, and there is an abundance, especially in St. Louis, properties that have been totally rehabbed, new kitchens, bathrooms, and everything have been sitting on the market for 100 days or more. So I'm pretty thankful that ours finally got some applicants.
I've noticed where I'm at, it just depends on where you're at. Like I've never seen a market that has so many different markets and styles. Like the one area that I've talked about that I'm investing in. I mean, granted, you're going to get the cream of the crop if you do this, but some of the units don't even have cabinets in them and stuff. And I won't go that far. And I don't know why, but every single one of them is painted this horrible color, and there's literally a light on a string. Yeah, it kind of looks like something from like the underworld, more or less. But yeah, people will rent them, but I don't know who in their right mind wants them.
I think the
I
closest thing that I have to that is that I don't have to provide any type of electronics when I rent out in my units.
I
So
think
no kitchens, no washing dryers, no refrigerators.
yeah, I think one thing that you have going for you in your market, Lindsay, is that you're doing burrs, right? So everything is looking nice and fresh when they're done. It's a little bit different. When we bought a couple in St. Louis, they were okay. From the pictures, they look decent, but then when you actually get in there and have somebody take some really nice photos on one of them, the previous landlord, I guess they painted it themselves and they got paint all over things that shouldn't have paint on them. And the tenants don't like to see that. I wouldn't like
yeah,
to see that if I was going to go rent a place either. So um, I, I know I have to do a better job of really looking deep, maybe even going to St. Louis. We haven't seen any of our properties in person. And
What?
Yeah, I got to get out there.
Time to go on a road trip, Frank.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I have so many states to cover, though.
It could be the old guy REI US tour.
Yes,
It's
on the
it's gonna
road.
have to be. I won't go during the winter, that's for sure.
Do you play any instruments?
Me, no.
We'll give you a kazoo then.
I don't think I could manage that either.
Do you guys, so okay, so this is like a pro and a con. So here in like the Pittsburgh region, it kind of has the same thing as the Midwest. It's kind of like the gate. Some people joke about it being like the gateway to the Midwest. The appreciation, depending on where you're at, but I want to say probably like 60, 70% of this area, it doesn't appreciate, kind of going along with what we were talking about earlier, Frank. It cash flows good, but it doesn't appreciate like so unless something drastic like COVID happens, or but on the other side though, like the Great Recession, the prices didn't really change that much. Like they dropped a little bit, but it I think it changed overall like 2% for like 2 or 3 years. But it's just kind of steadily stayed at between 3 and 4% every year. Do you guys kind of see the same thing out in the Midwest?
I went to the market knowing that there's not a lot of appreciation, so that was already something that I was not counting on. But I realized that I follow this podcast about Gary, Indiana, and then it's a turnkey provider, Tom Olson's podcast. And so they have a very close view into appraisals because they do turnkey properties. They are continuously getting appraisals. So they do tell you like where are the pockets of Gary, of which are on the trend of pricing higher. So I listen closely, of course, and it seems to be around like the hospitals areas and the places that have the most business. And it can be just a stretch of like 10 blocks. And it's different, there's different pockets. And then that's why, for a property, for example, something I'm buying, that's something that I really look closely to. It seems like I've been undercomping my properties if I keep following that same pattern, but so far it's working.
Yeah, so for me, where I'm investing, I think I do have a decent balance of appreciation and cash flow. So I'm kind of like right in the middle, where it's not heavily weighted towards either side. So it's not like one on the coast where you have crazy appreciation and no cash flow, and it's also not like a market where there's no appreciation and only cash flow. So I'm kind of in that middle spot where you can still get some cash flow, but then still get a decent amount of appreciation as well. And that was part of the reason why I'm looking at selling two or three of my properties is because outside of my market, there are areas that are just mostly for cash flow. And I was looking at selling those so I can kind of find that middle ground where I can get some appreciation as well. And so it's kind of interesting. You just kind of got to find the right cities in the Midwest that are growing because a lot of the cities in the Midwest are actually declining in population, whether the bigger cities or kind of the third tier, which is where I invest, is markets of 70, 70, 80,000. So it's nothing super crazy big. And then even smaller than that. So my other ones are in smaller markets than that. So um, it just depends. So right now I'm kind of readjusting and going towards a little bit bigger of a market that has a little bit more upside potential.
We the property that we have in Gary, we purchased through the Olson Group. It was a turnkey. I like their podcast. It is really informational. I think, like you, Lindsay, we're pretty much investing for cash flow, and appreciation is great if it does happen, but like you said, we're not counting on it either, but we're, you guys have heard me talk about where Cynthia and I are in our journey. We're closer to retirement. So, you know, I don't think we have a whole lot of time for appreciation to kick in and benefit us in that way that most people are able to use it, 10 or 15 years down the road. But as long as they cash flow, we have seen a little bit of appreciation. And Cody, you mentioned your market. The duplex that we have there has appreciated a lot more than our other properties have. So that was a nice surprise for me because I just thought, it was going to be 2 or 3% each year, and that would be fine. I think some of the things that we look forward to in the future, Jack, talking about, when we were talking with Mark this morning about cash flow versus what was the term he used? I can't remember the term, but it's growing wealth in the properties, but you can't always use it right away. And later on in years, you might be able to refinance. I think that's one of the things I'm looking forward to is if rates do ever come down a bit, we would be able to refinance some of the properties we bought, in the high sixes or mid sevens and create even more cash flow. That's what we're kind of things we're looking forward to doing. Hopefully it'll come around again, but that made a lot of people really wealthy when they were able to go from sevens and eights down to twos and threes as far as interest rates, and just created so much more cash flow. Dion is a great example of that.
I think so for my area, another con would be, and it's a con for everyone, I guess, here, is the weather, and we have older houses, and I know we've all kind of talked about this, but I mean, it depends on where you go. Like you can get newer stuff, but I want to say the bulk of the houses are like pre-1950s. So like all the houses I own are actually pre-1900s. So it makes working on them a little bit tricky in some aspects. You don't know what you're going to run into.
Especially if somebody else has already remodeled it once or twice over the years. I think remodeling is a lot harder than new construction because you never know what you're going to find in the walls and things. And like you've already experienced, getting rid of knob and tube wiring and old clay pipes for sewers and things like that. That's pretty tough. But
Hmm.
the homes themselves are really sturdy. I mean, they've been here for so many years. And well, in our portfolio, we do have one. I think the triplex was built in 1904, and then the duplex is in 76, and the rest of the stuff is in the 50s. But somebody on another show was talking about even something in the 50s. Now that's 70 years old. So in the 50s, they didn't build them as well as they did in the early 1900s. So if you don't keep the maintenance up on buildings like that, I think they're going to deteriorate a lot quicker than something that was built 100 years ago.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I think, I've tried to lean towards newer build if I'm able to find it. I know it is hard sometimes. The age range I shoot for is like 1980 to 2000, like maybe to 2010 if I'm lucky. But I do have a couple things like older than that. But yeah, I've been trying to upgrade it and make newer stuff. So then there's less things that can go wrong with it, like you said, the knob and tube and all those other things that, pre 1950, like, where like these newer ones, you don't really have to worry about that too much. They'll have like the more plastic plumbing and traditional, the newer modern stuff. So that's kind of why I've been leaning that route. If I can get the numbers to work with those I try to go that way. I think that's the hard part is like the newer stuff is just so hard to cash flow. You just got to find the right situation in order to do that, whether that's seller financing or finding a great deal. One of those two options usually is how or house hacking. One of those. Like that's how I've gotten into the newer stuff. Versus the older stuff can be a pain. That's kind of why I've steered away from it myself.
I like to find older homes that have been completely remodeled that have all new wiring and all new plumbing. So far, I've been lucky, and only this fourplex has been an issue for me. But even two units were completely redone, so they were kind of, I only had to deal with asbestos in the one unit, and it was a very small piece. They just said to I just hired professionals, and what they did was they just encapsulated it, and it was like one day, and it didn't even cost really that much. But yeah, I think they said they just wrapped it in fiberglass and they just built a box around it. But yeah, the other two, all the plumbing was redone recently. It had a brand new wiring, brand new breaker boxes, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's an old house, but it's a new old house.
Yeah, my market, I really like brick, and like Frank has said, most of my portfolio now are burrs, so everything is new. Furnace is new, boilers are new, um, plumbing is new, electrical is new. So I hope that the big investment that at the beginning is gonna pan out for having me a few years of maintenance free. But nevertheless, I'm always putting money away from reserves, knowing that I'm buying like older houses. I do have one house is 1900.
That one's in, well, that one's in Gary.
That one's in Hammond, actually.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know you went up there.
Yeah, so initially when I started investing, I was scared of Gary, like everybody was. So I decided to invest west of Gary, which is Hammond, a B type neighborhood. More people, more economic markers that were you would say, oh, that's a good place to invest. And that was my first property. Obviously, point cost of entry was higher there.
And is the cash flow lower there as well then?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, that's one thing I've considered, like Cody was saying, eventually if we have the opportunity to sell some of the older stuff and buy newer, but then I think we would be sacrificing cash flow, which is what we really need, unless you can find a really good deal. But Cody, when you were talking about that, I was thinking you talked about seller financing and some of those kinds of things. It seems if the homes are newer, the people aren't going to have owned them long enough to really have a bunch of equity, to help that process work.
Yeah, I think for me, when I found them, they're usually like 20 to 30 years old. So like the ones that I recently got in July, it was from an owner that owned them for a long time, and they were all built in the 90s. So like those have all been paid off. So that's kind of how it worked. So yeah, 1990 doesn't seem like that long ago, but it's actually 30 years now, which is crazy to me. Being born in
Yeah.
the 90s is wild. So now I feel like an old man, but yeah. So that's yeah. So like 80s, 90s, like as long as it's like you kind of have that initial owner, or some people, just might be at the point where they, 75 years old, don't want them anymore. They're just looking to get out of them. And if they're not all the way paid off, you can still do like the 50, 40, 10, which, I know this, Frank, but we, did that before too. If they have a mortgage that they need to pay off, then you can still find that 40% from the seller.
Cody, do you want to go a little bit more in depth for people who don't know what the 50-40-10 is?
Sure. So 50, 40, 10, kind of how the setup is. Typically, I've seen it work out when the seller has a mortgage that they need to pay off. And so 50% of the money would come from your lender. So typically, I found like a local credit union has worked best with me. So you use 50% to help pay off that um, mortgage, and then 40% is a seller carry or seller financing or owner financing, however you want to describe it. And so you can make any arrangements with the seller as needed. So typically, I set those up. Are 30-year amortizations with a certain rate, 4 or 5% typically, and then usually like a balloon after 5 years or 10 years. Just depends on what the seller is comfortable with, and then 10% coming from you, so that's out of your own pocket. So in reality, the seller is getting 60% down, helps pay off the mortgage, and then any money left over would go into their pocket, and then they'll still give you that 40% where you just pay that on a monthly basis. I know some people do like an interest only, but for me, I've like the 30-year amortization. I think that's easy to talk through with a seller because they've had that experience before. So that's typically how it works. And then, yeah, you just got to find the right person that's willing to work with you is probably the hardest part. But I never thought in a million years that I'd be the person that would do any sort of seller financing or 50-40-10s or anything like that. Now I've done it 3 times. So I'm very surprised it works, but it is an option for people out there. I didn't think it was going to be a thing until I actually did it myself.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but those weren't MLS listed deals. Those are like once you found off Craigslist and stuff.
Yeah, I found 7 of our properties off of Craigslist from 2 different sellers. Um, so that's how I've done majority of seller financing. Otherwise, I've done it with other off market deals. Typically not found on the MLS. I've offered it before on the MLS, but it just never seemed to work out.
Seems like that's one of the challenges that we hear about in various groups is if the seller isn't aware of what seller financing is or the 50-40-10, the people that you've purchased from were they savvy about that at least and you could have a good conversation, or were they scared of that you were trying to pull something over their eyes?
Yeah, I think the ones that I've met with, they had somewhat of an idea. Either they know someone that's done it before or have done it themselves before, and so I think that is key, especially if you're not the best salesman in the world, right? Like we're not all Pace Marby who's a wizard, talking to people. So for me, I think having a general idea, being in the game a long time, being an investor, like those are the type of people that you can have a conversation with that have done it before, whether it was a previous business that they did or, originally getting into that property for the first time, things like that. But then you just got to build the trust with them and be open to that. And then, try to, like when you make payments, make them early so they, are, good with that relationship. I think building that relationship with the seller is key, and kind of going from there. I think that's the most important part. And then you got to ask the right questions of like, hey, do you have, what needs do you have with the money? Do you need the money now, or is there something particular that you need it for? And then kind of go from there. A lot of people don't necessarily need the cash all up front, right? They don't have really a use for it, so they would rather make interest off of it, going forward. So I think a lot of people are more open to it, especially if you get into like that mid-sized multifamily, probably like 4 to 20 units, you'd see more and more people doing it in that space too, because they, that's how they know, like, that's how they get deals done in that space a lot of times. And I know like the Cody and Christian, that's how, what they did building their stuff, was using that and working with people that want that seller financing of some kind, or are open to it anyway and have done it in the past.
I feel like for seller finance on the MLS, the main barrier you have to cross is the realtor representing the seller. And the majority of realtors that I come across, they don't know about seller financing. They don't feel good about seller financing. They think that we're gonna just not skip the commissions or do something tricky, something shady, even though we're being represented by another broker. So that's the biggest barrier, I feel like, for me. If your realtor is not well versed in seller financing, then it's not gonna get to the seller. And that's why the majority of deals that occur with creative financing are direct to seller, mailers or cold call letters or however. But it does help when they already have a knowledge or any kind of information about seller financing. Either they know somebody has done it or they've done it themselves before.
Agreed. It's hard to have a middle person in those conversations. So it's hard to like really get an idea of what the seller is looking for, because in the end you got to make sure it's in the best interest of both parties. So like things that I've learned too is like, just because you can do seller financing doesn't mean you should. Just because you can do 50-40-10 doesn't mean you should, because it might not be a great deal. That's one way I would caution you as well is like, you still got to make sure it's a good deal, whether or not it's seller finance or traditionally financed, or all that kind of stuff. So just something to keep in mind too, because seller financing, you have a little more risk involved because you're not having that outside appraisal done. So you got to make sure you're like rock solid with the price point that you're at.
It is pretty surprising how many agents aren't familiar with it. And some, we've even heard some of them even think it's not legal. So yeah, that's really surprising to me.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear that too, or they just would be shocked that someone would take that offer, and they're not even willing to, discuss it. So I just hope it kind of grows, especially with the market the way it is right now, with rates being so high. You almost need to do that to make things work, and cash flow. And I think sellers are open to it. If they can get at least the cash out that they need, they'd be open to doing part of it. So it's definitely a tool that you can use nowadays. We just gotta, yeah. It's just a little harder having a middle person, or even two middle people. If you're working with your realtor and their realtor to get to the final person, that's hard to do sometimes. Yeah, all my stuff has been direct to seller, and having live conversations either in person or over the phone seems to be the best way to do it.
So, Cody, you see a property in Craigslist and you talk to the owner and then you go walk the property before you put an offer on it, or do
Yeah,
they tell you?
yeah. So I found, yeah, like usually they'll say like a local investor have a couple of properties, and I try to meet with them and just go through all of them with them, and just kind of get an idea their background, how long they owned it, why are they selling, that kind of stuff. Are they a tired landlord? They just don't want to do it anymore. That's kind of the main ones that I've heard. And then from there, it's like, okay, what are they looking to get from the transaction? Like, what's most important to them? And then if you lead with that, so they can get what they need out of it, the rest kind of will follow through. And then I've been trying to give like options that would make sense to like the average person. Just 30-year amortization, a certain interest rate, 4 or 5%, and then a balloon payment, I usually won't say a balloon until they say, "Oh, I don't want to, have this out for 30 years." I'm like, "Okay, then we can do a balloon of 5 to 10 years, whatever you think would be best, as long as there's, wiggle room on being able to refinance and stuff like that." So I try to make the um, creation of it, the financing part, as simple as possible to go through it. And then, yeah, like I said before, they got to have some knowledge of how it's done. That's typically what has worked for me. Trying to teach someone what it is that's has no idea is a little harder. I haven't been successful in that sense yet. But maybe someday. But yeah, that's what I've been looking at, because things on the MLS just don't cash flow right now, just based on rates. And so the deals I've done recently were seller financing. And then the last ones we did was 30-year 4% and then 10-year balloon. So then by the time 10 years are up, I'll have paid down enough where I can easily refinance out of it.
When you consider that 10 years, is that just the regular principal payment, or do you add anything to your payments to help that process?
Oh, that's just like your ongoing monthly mortgage payment. So, whatever it's amortized as, and it'll grow over time. And so, I think the deal I got already was a pretty good deal, so I could probably sell it for more than what I originally bought it for. But at the same time, then you got 10 years of pay down while you got another 10 years of, appreciation at the same time. And then, so you should be able to easily refinance at that point. I've done shorter balloons, but you just got to make sure you have, for me, you just, I did a 2-year balloon, but I also knew at that time, I probably had 20% equity in it, when I bought it compared to what I bought it for. So, you just got to make sure you're okay on that end, because, like I said before, there's no appraiser, right? So you just got to know your numbers, because you could get stuck the other way and overpay for something that you can't get out of. And obviously, you don't want that to happen. So you just got to make sure your numbers are rock solid. You trust where you're at. You know the market inside and out before making an offer.
When you do 50, 40, 10, you do get an appraisal, right?
Yeah, those you would, because you'd have a lender, so the lender would do it, and so how those typically set up, the lender wants to be in or needs to be in first position, so the seller also has to be okay being in second position. So you just got to have that conversation with the sellers and let them know that's a situation where they would be second position, because lenders won't do it otherwise.
When you talk about the appraisal, so if the lender's doing a loan for 50% of the value, do they really care if you would typically buy something for 450 and it has to appraise for 450, but when you're doing a 50, 40, 10 and they're only going to have a loan for 100 or 150, it doesn't necessarily have to appraise for the 450. How has that worked?
They still wanted it to hit their internal numbers that they look for. So I can't remember what my personal lender looks for off the top of my head. But it needs to be in a certain ratio, the DSCR ratio. As long as it hits that, they're fine with it, because, yeah, like you said, they have a much lower percentage. Usually they're 70, 75, 80%, which is a little different spot. And then they want you to have that 10% involved, so then you have a little skin in the game. So it'd be nice to do a 50-50, but they need that 10% from you to make sure that you got that skin in the game and have the funds to be able to cover that.
So what's the So what's the since we've all worked on our places and stuff, what's the weirdest thing that you found in one of your places?
Better physically see them than I closed my property with a motorcycle in a garage. And then 2 days later, the seller came in and he's like, I forgot my motorcycle. We were like, oh,
I
okay.
sold
I guess you can pick it up. I thought it came with the house, but I guess not. Technically, I could have fought him, but
Yeah, I don't think I had anything too crazy. One time I was going through our inspection when I was going to buy one of our places, and there was a giant wasp nest in the basement. So had that been taken care of before I bought the place. So
all of our stuff's been done by property managers, so I don't think there's been anything too crazy that they've run across. Yeah, they've all been fairly normal, I guess.
I mean, I definitely had two evictions that had a bunch of stuff in it, but that was kind of run of the mill stuff. It wasn't like a crazy hoarder house or something like that. It was just, you know, definitely trashed where you had to replace everything, but um, nothing too crazy. I'm trying to think if there's anything that was like, wow, how am I this in here? But no, I think the craziest one was that wasp nest, which was in the same place of that same eviction, so makes sense.
The craziest thing I found was doing a remodel. It was the first duplex, half it had to be redone, and I was trying to keep the countertops one piece because it was granite. Why they put granite there? This place is going to pull more rent for having granite, but hey, I'm going to be careful with it. So anyway, I pull it off the one section, and I noticed that there was a gap behind the Lazy Susan. Someone shoved a Halloween skeleton back there.
did it scare you?
It, I think I saw it, and I was just kind of more like a what is this?
We have, well, you guys heard me talk about the gun lady, right? That's probably the
Oh
weirdest
yeah,
thing so
yeah.
far for us. We still, so she is getting evicted. She went to the first court date and decided she wanted to go to trial. So now we're waiting for the trial date there.
Yeah.
So,
I
Nice.
don't understand how she thinks she's gonna win.
well, I think the way her mind works, she might think she's in the right, but
Yeah.
yeah. And hopefully, like Cody was saying, we got pictures of how the unit is now, and she has a lot of stuff in there, but the building itself didn't look like she was mistreating anything. So hopefully she'll leave without any issues.
Oh, I forgot I had one lady asked me if the house I had was haunted because their toddler was said that she was seeing things, and so we sold that place, but not for that reason. But she was asking if it was haunted. That was the first one I've heard that.
I had that with the same place I was just talking about with the Halloween skeleton. I kept going there, and every time, like, there's no access for the tenants to get upstairs. I kept going there, and the lights would be on. Eventually, the windows kept coming on or opening up. So I eventually got to the point where I told an electrician that I wanted the breaker pulled out of that the upstairs, and I just or got a Craig jig and just drilled and screwed the window shut.
We've worked in some homes throughout my career that I never really heard or saw anything, but my cousin was a big chicken, and wouldn't like to go to work by himself, unless I was there with him. Or if I would run out and get some lunch, he would have to come with me because he didn't want to stay at the house by himself. I don't know if there was any real truth to what he was feeling, but I was thinking about your tenant, Cody, if you asked her what she was putting in her toddler's bottle, maybe that was the issue.
No, I didn't ask that, but it
I
was.
know.
I was like definitely caught off guard because I never like considered anything until she said that. But and the previous seller, the seller didn't say anything in regards to it, so I think it was just the tenant
Yeah.
or the kid having fun. Who knows?
Yeah. Some people are super sensitive to that kind of stuff. I thought it was normal. My parents used to put all kinds of stuff in my bottle to put me to sleep.
Can't do it anymore.
Maybe that's why I'm hooked now.
Yeah, I guess the same tenant did take out the screen in the bedroom and must have smoked in the bedroom. So maybe that was part of it.
You might have to do some editing, Jack.
Maybe just a little.
Oh yeah, I suppose this is not.
This might work on one of Mark's lives, but not the sophisticated shows like this.
I think Mark threw out a poll. I think it was in the school community. He's saying he's going to be my 1,000th subscriber. I told him that I'm going to be his 1,000th subscriber, and then he replied back something like, "What?" He's like, "You're not subscribed to my channel." I was like, "No. When you get close, I'm going to unsubscribe, and then once you get to 1,000, I'll resus or we're at 999. I'll just resubscribe, and I'll be at the 1,000th."
Well, yeah, then you'll be trade better $9.99.
Yeah.
I'll do the same thing, and then it'll be 1001.
Yeah, now you're giving us ideas. I'm gonna beat you to it.
Everyone that watches, he'll get up to 999 and drop to like 800.
Yeah, we thought we were helping.
Yeah, and then he's wondering why I dropped so many subs.
He's pretty amazing. All the stuff he's been learning and doing. I mean, when he broadcasts his lives, he's like on 4 or 5 different, X and Instagram and everything. It's hard to keep track. Might have to go get a couple new phones, a couple more laptops, so we could be on everything with him at the same time.
But he's growing. So
Yeah,
close.
yeah, he's pretty close. It seems like we were talking about that the other day. Sorry, that's a little bit off topic, but about how we're in this community, right? And there's only so many people here. We're wondering how do we get outside that barrier to attract new people because the same people see us all the time, and it's really, you know, he's up to 800 and something now. I don't know how many more people in the group really watch what he does. So, but there doesn't seem like to be a clear path to bring in people from outside the group. And maybe
You'd
not too
almost
many
have,
people outside the group.
I'll say, you'd almost have to join another group that would be somewhat interested, and almost like something like Bigger Pockets, but it'd be too much of a leap for Mark to do Bigger Pockets because everyone on Bigger Pockets is absolutely huge.
That's true.
Ever
And
applied to Bigger Pockets?
What's that?
Has he ever applied to be a guest?
I don't think he has.
Yeah, that could be something. We can make him apply. I
yeah,
can send an application for him.
there you go. Well, with Dion, Dion's picking up steam in that area too. And we've seen a couple people cross over from Bigger Pockets into Dion's lives, but it hasn't been like I would expect, 50, 60, 100 people to jump this way because of his message, but it hasn't been even that for him. But like Dion was saying too, Dion was very active in all the chats and everything on videos from Bigger Pockets, and I think that helped him gain a little bit of notoriety that way. I don't know if Mark wants it that bad.
I think he has a lot of time right now. So,
He should sponsor a sporting event. He should become one of the Chicago Bears sponsors.
oh, there you go.
I think that would go the other way. He needs to pick a good team.
Yeah, the team up north is a little better.
I might have to get to Pittsburgh to see a Steelers game, though. Chester was threatening to drag me out there when the Steelers play the Ravens.
I don't know if this is a for sure yet, but I think the Packers play the Steelers in Ireland this year. I think that's what they said, but I'm not sure. The schedule hasn't come out yet. But if that happens, we'll all go to Ireland.
I hope they have bigger seats. I can't fit in the regular stadium seats.
In Lambeau Field, they give you 18 inches on a bench. That's your seat.
Oh, well, that's better than being cramped in a regular seat with arms. I had to have a few people help me out last time. I was kind of stuck.
There's actually like a new section. We upgraded to the new section, and we're front row, but we're like in the nosebleed section. And yeah, that one's like more of a traditional chair, whereas like the traditional bowl is just you get 18 inches of metal. That's all you get for your seat.
Those guys are out there in the snow with no shirts and everything. That's crazy.
Yeah, we do it right. That's for sure. Yeah, just had the big draft. It was fun.
Yeah, it looked like it.
Sorry, we derailed your topics here, Jack.
Oh, that's all right.
We're going to be like Mark. I tell him he always ends up on the cutting room floor. He never makes the final cut when we do our recordings. So I don't think I've helped his subscription rate at all. When you, one thought that's been circling around in my head was, I think I shared it with Cody. Like when we buy a place and you put your down payment and you have your estimated all-in cost, say it's whatever it is, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, and then you get into it and you have your cash on cash return figured out and things like that, your positive cash flow. But then something comes up like what happened to us, and we had to do a paint job and flooring, and that's another $8,000 you put into the property. But now it's going to be stable, right, for a while. Lindsay, you kind of touched on it, where I was thinking of it kind of like front loading, like you said. You're putting the money into it in the beginning, and hopefully it's not going to need anything for quite a while. So do you think that evens out, or would you think this is a money pit, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Since I'm putting for the burrs, since I'm putting the money in the beginning, it's calculated into the cash on cash return. But for the other properties, I haven't had like huge expenses, like maybe fixing a toilet and things like that, but not big capital expenditures. So I'm sure it's gonna happen, but I don't see it like that, like a money pit yet. Talk to me in 2 years.
Okay. Remember the date, Jack.
Yes. Put it in your calendar.
I like to think of it more as like I don't know, like just doing preventive maintenance that you know is going to come up, you know. Like I'll give you a prime example. I've gotten to the point with my rentals, whether, for example, the toilets are functional or not, I start ripping them out because it seems like within the first year or two, something always ends up happening, or the place has been vacant real long, and the honeycomb seal is on its last leg, and they end up breaking. So I just got to a point where I just change all the toilets. If I'm pulling the toilet in the bathroom, I just do the flooring too.
Yeah, I've heard people that like really try to repair everything no matter what. And that's not me at all. I'm definitely the one that would rather replace it. And then, you got a brand new one that, should work just fine. And so that's kind of how I approach, our rentals is once it starts getting to be in rough shape, make sure you replace it versus try to repair it every time. Because I know there are people that will just try to repair and just keep throwing duct tape on it to get it through another year. But for me, it's like at some point, just replace it. It'll be better in the long run. Cause less damage, like you said, if the toilet's going to leak and then cause damage to the bathroom. Because we actually, one of the places we bought, we had to replace a couple bathroom floors because of that same issue. It was leaking all over the place, and we had to replace the flooring in two of our bathrooms of the new places we bought.
Yeah, in that respect, it's probably true because a couple of handyman visits cost a lot more than a new toilet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, toilets are cheap. It's 100, $150 maybe, depending on what kind you get, and then you're good for 20 more years. Like, it's such a cheap thing. Like, why are we spending the time to repair a $150 item, right? Like, I can understand HVAC stuff, right? Like, that's a bigger ticket item where if we can fix it, maybe, but if it's cheaper, just replace it. Like blinds, just replace the blinds and be done, versus messing with it for a long period of time, or I don't know, other things like that.
It's my house, though. I will repair
It's
it. It
fair.
doesn't get old now.
Your primary?
It's like I had a leaky toilet. Just remember now, yeah, we changed the valve and it was like new. I'm not gonna think get a new toilet.
Well, I think that about wraps this episode up. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to Lindsay Does Investing. Is that right? Or Linz Does Investing,
Lynn does investing, yeah.
and Frank Old Guy REI, who's very easy to remember because it's in his background.
Yeah. Thanks, Jack, for having us.
Thanks, anytime.
Yes, thank you.